playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called persuasion.
They're the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
What does rich mean?
Stories and wisdom.
Welcome to the Stories and Wisdom podcast. Today we are joined by Cindy Anderson, Global Executive at the IBM Institute of Business Value, where she leads thought leadership engagement and eminence. You also serve as the co-founder and board advisor at the Global Thought Leadership Institute at the American Productivity and Quality Center, APQC. Cindy, great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Pradeep. It's really great to be here.
We met at an award ceremony in Istanbul, and I know there was some great work that you've been leading at IBM that got you there.
That's right.
So with that as the background, can you describe the mission and the impact of thought leadership at IBM, the work you do, and then even the institute that you founded?
Yeah, absolutely. Thought leadership is a very unique type of content, and it's very different from other types of content, but often gets confused with content marketing. And there's a real simple way to tell the difference between thought leadership and content marketing. And that is, well, there's two things. One is thought leadership is always based on data. And the second thing is thought leadership never has an overt selling message or a commercial message. So those are the two sort of easy ways to distinguish between the two. And the way that we define thought leadership as part of the Global Thought Leadership Institute is that it's distinctive, evidence-based intelligence that helps leaders make smarter business decisions and gives them the inspiration to act. So again, you hear that sort of intelligence, data-informed, and again, no sort of commercial aspect to it. There's fine pieces of content that have commercial aspects and that aren't data-oriented, but they're not thought leadership. So that's the definition and the mission. And so what we do at the IBV, as well as through the Global Thought Leadership Institute, is really try to advance the practice of the production of thought leadership so that organizations can deliver this kind of insight to their clients, to business leaders who are really needing it, because we know about 90% of business leaders rely on thought leadership to make the business decisions to fill gaps in their own organizations with data and insight that they just don't have available.
And I want to bring a little bit into the work that you're doing in terms of how it lands, because when I used to work at Microsoft, we had access to thought leadership papers as well. And they were big documents, PDFs, well designed. But when I actually saw the work that you were doing, it's not just it's a PDF design. There's a user interface there that helps in the understanding of the depth. I read your AI papers that recently came in. The way the data is coming through and even the interface was very smooth. So I want you to talk through using design for thought leadership. When did that happen? Because this is something new that I haven't seen that often being used.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the way that we think about the thought leadership, I mentioned, the kind of the definition. And the last part of that definition is really the inspiration to act. And I think it's fairly simple to create content that educates people, that gives people information that they need, that they rely on to make a decision. It's much harder, especially today, to get them attracted to that information to start with. So to get them actually deep into it. And so many organizations, ours included, are using data visualizations and really kind of compelling designs, some of them AI generated, some of them kind of AI influenced, to really help sort of draw attention to the valuable information that's there, because there's just so much information out there now. And so I supervise one of the groups that I oversee at the IBM Institute for Business Value is the design team. And they have become really expert in using some of the AI tools to build really clever, really interactive, really compelling designs that are just, you almost can't look away. They're that interesting. And then the other thing that we're doing along with others is building sort of interactive capabilities around the data. So letting clients and others come to your website and import their own or answer questions to identify their own perspectives on various parts of the data. And then they walk away with a little bit of an analysis of where they fall compared to some of the other folks in the study. So Those kinds of things, I think, are the ways that we're working to get more interest in the thought leadership, to make sure that it's relevant to business leaders who are inundated with all sorts of information. We do know, Pradeep, as part of our seminal study on thought leadership value, that executives, CEOs, CIOs, CFOs spend about 3 hours a week with thought leadership, which is astounding when you think about it's almost 10% of normal, if there is such a thing, work week that executives are choosing to spend time with thought leadership that's helping them make better decisions when there are how many hundreds of things that they could be doing instead. So that sort of gives you an idea of how valuable that kind of content is for them.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to actually jump into our first segment. It's memoir moments. What I want you to actually share with us is an origin story where you started to get on this path to explore thought leadership, even in terms of influencing leaders the way you are getting in. And if you want to also bring in the aspect of it's not just the information, it's about inspiring them to act as you brought in. What is a memoir moment or a group of them that helped you get on that path?
Yeah, also a great question. I've been in marketing, communications, PR for my entire career. And I started in thought leadership about 15, maybe 18 years ago. And the company that I worked for, I was in a marketing role at the time, had a research director who was very academic. In fact, he wore a bow tie. He looked a little like a professor. And we had really, really strong research about the practice that we were working in, about the competitive environment, about the benefits of actually working with our organization, happened to be a not-for-profit. But this research director was holding this research so tightly. He wouldn't let us use the research to produce any of the content, any of the thought leadership. He said, we can't let other people see what we know because then they might use it against us, or they might use it in a way that we haven't thought about using it. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. And then I'd be sitting in meetings and he would, this very academic, lovely man, but he would ask what my raison d'etre was. Now, despite the fact that he wasn't French, obviously I'm not French, he asked it every single time we were in a meeting together because he just wasn't buying the value of producing content, of being in a marketing role, of trying to share information. Finally, the CEO realized that we were sitting on a treasure trove of data. This was even before AI became a real treasure trove of data, right? And he said, let's give it a try. Let's take a look at this data. Let's produce something and let's see what happens. And turns out he was right. And he overcame the resistance of our research director. And we started using this research in a way that positioned the organization that I was part of as a leader by far in the industry, because we had this insight that was coming from these hundreds of thousands of people who had been surveyed over the course of the last several years. So that's sort of the genesis of my intro into thought leadership and my love for creating content that's based on data. So the CEO that I worked for at the time was fond of saying, we don't produce thought leadership because we don't have anything else to do. We produce it because it really helps our business. And I've tried to keep that in mind over the last couple of decades and share that with other folks as well, because it really does make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And the part where you're trying to actually get to the inspiration to act, is that come from your background in content marketing, but then now we get to thought leadership. You wanted to be usable in the field and executive as well?
I think so. If you think about the origins of thought leadership, speaking of origin stories, McKinsey is probably the grandfather of thought leadership. They've been producing their newsletter for 60 years now, and they'll tell you that they don't have to justify their existence. They don't have to answer the raison d'etre question, right? They just know that it's good for their business. And I think that's the kind of thing that we want to keep in mind, because if organizations and the executives in organizations are looking to thought leadership for inspiration, the inspiration is only going to take them so far. They've got to walk away with something, right? I think people get maybe not frustrated, but a little, maybe it is frustrated that if they don't know what to do with the information that they've now got. So we sometimes talk about thought leadership and action leadership together. Because if you give people the inspiration, but they don't know how to take action, you haven't really gone the full way that you need to go with the content.
The data is valuable only when you can take action on it. And only when you can take action on it does the business move, and you are running the business anyway. But in the industry, you also are making the moat deeper, right? For differentiation, and thought leadership is a very powerful.
Right, exactly.
So let's go to our next segment. This is going to be quite different. It's called Decision Do-Over. With hindsight, obviously, and the fact that you live in Singapore now, so there's also an international flavor to how you look at things. Are there decisions or a decision that you would want to have a do-over on, that you look back and go like, I could have done that differently or sooner, and what decision would it be, and how would you think through that?
Yeah, my decision do-over would absolutely be to learn Chinese way earlier than what I started. So I've been studying for 2.5 decades now, and it wasn't soon enough. In fact, a friend of mine, I was an RA in college, and he was taking Chinese classes in college. And I went to school in the Midwest at the University of Iowa, and I didn't even know there were Chinese classes at the University of Iowa back then. Fast forward to now, I live in Singapore. My husband lives in China. We have a daughter who was adopted from China 26 years ago. They always talk about hindsight. Had I known, I would have been picking up those Chinese classes as a freshman and really getting deep into it. And honestly, in retrospect, I don't even care if it was Chinese. I think learning another language is such a valuable skill that, especially when you live outside the US and see how many languages other people speak just naturally, I feel a little disappointed in myself that I'm only monolingual. Everybody around me is, bilingual, trilingual, multilingual. So I would definitely do that over.
So it's funny you bring that up, because when I watch a movie, there's 3-4 languages that come in an Indian movie that comes in, and you don't realize that I'm switching back and forth. You just understand what's going on. There's Hindi, Tamil, a little bit of Telugu thrown in, and then there's English coming in. You don't actually realize you're switching languages. You just understand what's happening.
Yeah, I hear it in my day-to-day, because I have lots of Indian colleagues, I have lots of Chinese colleagues, I have lots of Singaporean, Malay, Korean colleagues, and there's a lot of switching back and forth, and I'm waiting for the subtitles. So I feel a little left out because I just didn't make the language decision soon enough.
So when you speak Mandarin, what's your preferred dialect, or what's your more comfortable dialect?
It's Mandarin, but I'm not sure you could say I actually speak it. I can order coffee at the Hawker Center. I can ask directions. I can mostly get around and order from a menu, but I certainly couldn't carry on a conversation, even after 2.5 decades of studying.
I know Singapore is heavy on Hokkien and smattering of Cantonese. I mean, there's also Mandarin speakers, but...
Yeah, there's a lot of mixed languages here too. So there's a Singlish, they call it, which is actually a combination of Chinese and English and a little Singaporean uniqueness thrown in there. So yeah.
Okay, our next segment is Vision Venture. What's the next frontier you're working towards? And this could be career, but this could also be on your own personal front.
So I think you mentioned at the beginning of the session that I had authored a book and have founded a not-for-profit association, the Global Thought Leadership Institute. And I think the frontier for me is really growing that institute in a way that helps the people that are coming up behind me in the thought leadership function, in the marketing function, who need to understand how valuable thought leadership is. As one of the folks were quoted in our book said, talks about thought leadership as the red carpet into the C-suite, which is a really interesting analogy because it sits at the very top of the marketing funnel and opens doors. It builds that trust. It builds a brand. It builds a relationship. And so I think if this association that we're building and the basis that we've established with the book, including a baseline ROI, we actually calculated the return on investment for thought leadership for the first time. If that can help the next generation of content marketers who, need to incorporate thought leadership into their marketing practice, And to those who are producing thought leadership just on their own, that to me, I think is going to be a legacy that I would like to leave in that next phase of the journey.
Is there a space for thought leadership beyond business? Even things that you're bringing up, which is understanding or appreciating more than 2, 3 languages and embracing that being one, like as a life choice, and so many others. Is there a space for that? Is that something that you also embrace with your nonprofit, or is it strictly like business thought leadership, C-suite, red carpet?
It's interesting that you ask that question because we do have, as part of the board of advisors for the Global Thought Leadership Institute, there are a number of folks who what they would consider sort of thought leaders in their subject matter area. And they're not all business folks. There's a couple of academics. There's one person who has her own business. And I think there is a place for thought leadership. I think it's more difficult to think about thought leadership in your personal life because you probably wouldn't make the investment in gathering data in the same way that you would in a business setting. That said, though, the practice of thought leadership, the kind of discipline of looking at data and of staying away from an overt commercial sort of connection is not a bad approach to a lot of things because it keeps you a little bit separate from what might be more of a mercenary approach to things, where you might be able to keep a little more distance than you would otherwise if you were digging in a different way. So there are elements of the practice of thought leadership that might be useful. I'm not sure that I would ever see someone sort of producing a piece of thought leadership before they plan their wedding or something like that. But it's immensely useful in a business setting. It's immensely useful in not just a big business setting, but a lot of various business settings. And I think just the techniques that you might use to produce thought leadership would be valuable in a personal setting in that way.
I'll bring this up in the context of Singapore itself. When you start looking or reading Lee Kuan Yew's book, it's extremely inspirational, but because here is a leader who brought a swampland into one of the top countries in the world in a very extremely short period of time with clear insight. But at the same time, was building a nation where multiple communities could come together, thrive, and literally said, what's our language? Well, 4 national languages. Like that's some clarity that lots of other countries with more history have not embraced. And that thought leadership compared to nothing, yes. I mean, compared to anything else, I would say that's a very strong thought leadership, but it's not in business. Yes, there was a huge commercial angle on how he brought the country forward. So that's what I'm talking about. Even if you bring it down to community building in a multi-communal, of course, speaking from the US, I almost feel like we need that badly instead of the immigration ideas or even how universities are now being asked to explore how they bring in international students. Like, is that something around there in thought leadership that there is a space to explore?
I think the distinction I would make is that what you're talking about is really subject matter expertise or leadership charisma, which is fairly different from thought leadership. I think there's a place for thought leadership to support that sort of leadership style because there are always going to be people who need data, people who want evidence of value. And that's really where thought leadership plays. It's that credibility and that sort of validity that it brings to open those doors, to lay out the red carpet. And then people are more open to ideas that a subject matter expert, that an inspirational leader might have, if there's that sort of sense of credibility behind it. So I think the two can play together. I don't think they're interchangeable, but I think they play together.
Absolutely. Let's go to our next segment. It's called Puzzle Points. So in Puzzle Point, I want you to bring a puzzle and then think through the different points or angles for it. And that this could be something you're currently exploring, still exploring. It's sort of the edges of where you're just pushing the boundary, but you are at the boundary getting there. And it could be work, it could be life, it could be some other exploration, even your nonprofit. What's a puzzle that you want to bring in and talk us through?
It has to do with the proving the value, sort of where does the value of thought leadership sit? So I mentioned the book, which is called The ROI of Thought Leadership, because we did calculate the ROI. There's still a lot of skepticism about calculating a quantifiable, quantitative return on something that's very intangible, like thought leadership, like trust, like credibility. And so I think the puzzle pieces in your game haven't come together yet, but they're all there. And so I think that's one, I mentioned legacy earlier. I think that's one thing that I'd like to solidify, I'd like to see solidified in the next several years is let's really decide how we're going to measure this thing that we all know is valuable because it's been done for way too long. If it wasn't valuable, everybody would have stopped doing it by now. Let's really figure out how to measure it. Let's agree on what those metrics look like, and let's get them embedded in the practice so that the next generation of thought leadership producers and the marketers who are using thought leadership don't have to justify their existence every day the way that we did.
There is a latency though, right? Once somebody comes in, experiences what you built, because it's no longer just a document. I've seen it, it's an experience. Once you've experienced it, there is some thinking, reflection, experiments that we will have to do. And then there is value that could come in commercially, that could come in through a talk, that could come in through so many other ways. But then there is a latency in there. You can with certainty measure the who saw, how long, which parts, and then did they like share. That's the easy part of it. But you were talking impact and influence to act. Like, how are you connecting that feedback loop? How is that individual now sharing it in multiple other ways or embedding it this in and then leading towards business impact? Like, how are you connecting those feedback loops or the point back into your content to see the value?
Yeah, we know from our research that 87% of the executives, and we interviewed 4,000 executives around the world, double-blind survey, so all of the right techniques that we would use if we were building thought leadership for any other business process. 87% of the executives said that they made a specific purchase decision as a result of thought leadership that they consumed in the last 90 days. 99% said that they've made a purchase decision at some point in the past year as a result of it. And 100% said that they were likely to, even if they hadn't in the past. So there's a huge reliance. Executives aren't particularly willing to admit that they need a lot of help. They're willing to admit that thought leadership is valuable in these surveys. And because they're willing to admit that, there's some credibility that comes with that. So when we calculate the ROI as a result of the data that we collected from the executives and, market data that we pulled in from publicly available sources, it's a really credible metric to rely on in terms of the value that thought leadership can bring. But again, I think because it's an intangible, you talk about latency, there's also a cumulative effect over time, right? Thought leadership isn't one piece of content. It's not one campaign. It's not one billboard or ad. It's really building a relationship over time. And so there is that lag, there is that cumulative effect, which is why I think you have to look at this. We did a series of 3 studies over the course of 2 years. I think it'll be really curious to do additional studies in the next year or two to see how things have changed, if they have at all. But I think the more we study it, the more we turn that research lens on our own practice and do exactly what we're doing for the business, for the practice of thought leadership, the more credibility that we'll gain for the practice as well.
So the surveys that you mentioned, they're to the customers or clients, 1,000 to the buyers. And when they are saying in 90 days that we actually made a purchase, they're actually saying, based on this information, we made a purchase. They're not saying, based on this information we bought with you. They're just saying, this helped me make a decision in this category, but not with you. So it's like literally in that landscape. I want to make that clarity because it is a very different one than a marketing document that says, buy my product. This is here's the space, get to know a bit more, and then make a decision with these ideas.
Yeah, it's not about a widget. It's not about buying a thing. It's about buying that credibility, buying from the brand, buying the trust.
Yeah, and then Darren is the person with the bow tie talking about how does this line up with, will that actually help our competitors more? That lines up. But then the bigger point that you're making is this is a relationship trust. It's not about buy from us. It is come here for your ideas when you're uncertain. And that's the brand. And the other brand you brought up was McKinsey, which stands for the same thing in terms of thought leadership, I would think.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Great. I think that would be that segment. And we're going to our last segment, and this is this or that. So lightning round, Cindy, and I'm just going to give you two phrases. You're choosing one, and if you want to deliberate and say why, you can. Otherwise, we on to the next one.
Okay.
First one, bold vision or quiet influence?
Oh, bold vision.
Bold vision. Ideas that scale or ideas that inspire?
Ideas that inspire. Because if you inspire, you're going to scale.
Industry expertise or cross-industry curiosity?
Oh, always curiosity. Doesn't even matter what kind. Always curiosity.
A proven playbook or new experiment?
Oh, gosh. Can I say an experimental playbook?
Okay, you had to describe that now.
I'm trying to make them both work. It goes back to the curiosity, really. It's like, it's fine to have a playbook, but you can't run the same plays on the same field all the time. You got to take your playbook and run to a different field.
So you want to call an audible?
Yeah, I guess I do.
Leading with data or leading with purpose?
I got to go with leading with data.
Okay. And any reason why you chose that?
Because thought leadership is all about the data. I don't think you can get to the purpose without the data.
Cindy, thank you for sharing your stories and insights today with us on the Stories and Wisdom podcast. For those who want to explore more about your work or, IBM's Institute for Business Value, where can they connect with you or the organization?
Yep. Two things. For IBM's Institute for Business Value, you can go to ibm.com/IBV. And for the Global Thought Leadership Institute, you can go to apqc.org/GTLI.
Thank you again for your time. Your reflections remind us that, leadership is more than just vision. It's about, ideas that earn trust, build long-term relationships, but very importantly, spark action for leaders who are coming in. So thank you for showing us how to do that, influence, and how you've been doing that, I think, with significant amount of clarity and integrity to shape both business and society. So thank you.
Pleasure to be here, Pradeep. Thanks for having me.
And for everybody who's listening on the Stories and Wisdom podcast, we'll be back with more stories, more wisdom, and more fun guests. Catch you up with the next episode.
Playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called persuasion.
They're the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
Real deep pain.
That was a very different level of inequity.
What does rich mean?
Stories and wisdom.